1. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Ignition News. Tonight, we're looking at how power impacts and punishes the wrong people. We've got 5 late night stories for you tonight. On the surface, of course, but they all tell one story. When institutions fail, the people that get hurt aren't the ones who caused the failure. It's kids who lose childcare. It's families who keep drinking radioactive water. It's the immigrant who gets prosecuted for embarrassing the administration. And it's communities that depend on services being deliberately destroyed. Welcome, everyone, to the Ignition News, our daily news show. We're in hyper-focus mode right now, and sometimes we even put out 2 episodes a day, which this is our late night 2-episode kind of a day, because there are really important stories to talk about. But we'll also talk about what happens when people who fight back actually start to win. So we're going to talk about Minnesota tonight. We're going to talk about Colorado tonight. We're going to talk about Maryland tonight. We're going to talk about Iowa tonight. We're going to talk about Ohio tonight. 5 different places, one distinct pattern: resistance, persistence, and true uncensored news. Welcome to the Ignition News, everybody. It's our late night show. We're going to start with Minnesota. Obviously, Minnesota is in the news right now. And of course, one of the reasons for that is that the president and the administration is really hyper-focusing on Minnesota in this really random conspiracy theory that's happening right now. The Trump administration just froze all childcare payments to Minnesota, not to facilities under investigation, to the entire state. Deputy HHS Secretary Jim O'Neill announced today that, and of course he announced this on X of all places, he announced that they were pausing all federal funding, they were going to demand audits, and they were going to require photo evidence for every child care payment nationwide. 19,000 American children just lost access to childcare. Why is that, you might ask? Well, because federal prosecutors say potentially $9 billion in Medicaid and social services funds have been stolen through fraud since 2018. The biggest case was Feeding Our Future, a $300 million pandemic food fraud scheme. 57 people were convicted and 92 defendants across all fraud cases, and 82 of those are Somali Americans. There's unfortunately a video of a daycare with learning misspelled on the sign that allegedly got $4 million while appearing to have no children. The facility had 95 violations between 2019 and 2023. So yes, there is real fraud. And I want to be quite clear that this is a developing story. And here on the Ignition News, I want to be very clear with you that we are not taking a position at this time because we intend to fully investigate, pull apart all the facts of the situation, and then present them to you in a truthful manner. But what is clear is that we need to investigate and understand what happened before we start talking about what happens next. And instead of targeting the fraud, by the way, they have targeted the community. The president calls Minnesota a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity. That's an ironic statement for the most criminal president in American history. He terminated temporary protected status for Somalis. ICE has launched operations specifically targeting undocumented Somali immigrants, and now, of course, they have froze funding for legitimate providers serving 19,000 kids. Well, here's the thing, everyone. How did this fraud happen? How did it happen in the first place? And the reality is it happened because of weak oversight, a lack of proper auditing, and regulatory capture. Something we talk about, of course, on our signature show, Rebel Radio. Political considerations really prevented a lot of the scrutiny necessary for these systems. And of course, Governor Walz has been asking the legislature for more authority to crack down on fraud for years. The system failed to prevent this. But when fraud gets exposed, who has been punished? It's not the regulators, it's not the legislators, it is the kids, the families, and the entire community. That is collective punishment disguised as accountability. And again, I want to be very clear with you on a couple fronts. This story is developing very quickly, but it looks and sounds a lot to me like Benghazi. It seems a lot like Benghazi to me, where the GOP manufactures a problem, they manufacture outrage, they spread conspiracy in the midst of actual truth, they defund critical infrastructure necessary, and then it breaks the entire system. There's a lot here in this story, and what I want to do and what I want to be clear about our mission, I want to be very clear about our mission at the Ignition News. And I want to be very clear with you about how I'm looking at this story. I think there is balance on both sides of this story, and I haven't been able to pull apart everything in that story. And so I'm going to pull it apart to the best of my ability before providing you with a take, because I owe that to you. It would be easy for me to take one side and one silo right now. That would be very easy. But the reality is, truth demands accountability, and accountability demands investigation. And it demands we look at the entire facts. One of the things I will say is clearly this is being used as a targeted approach to attack Somalis in Minnesota. What I will also say is the numbers in this instance are damning. There is clear fraud, and we need to understand what happened. So that's a bit of a breaking news story update for you, but also a commitment that we're going to investigate this fully and provide you with balanced, factual information, not conspiracy, not political agenda, but just this is what we found and this is what you should know. Welcome, everyone, to the Ignition News. This is a daily podcast, sometimes two times a day, we broadcast the news. Today's one of those days with a late night show. We're getting ready. We have just one more day now left of the year. There's one more day left of New York City before they have Mayor Zohran Mamdani. That's what I'm most excited about. I don't know what you're excited about. Let's go ahead and get into the next story. Let's go to the next story in Colorado. So we're jumping from Minnesota to Colorado on the Ignition News. And it's, when you pull it back, this is really quite sad. The president issued, I think it was only his second veto of this term. Trump just vetoed a bill to bring clean water to 50,000 people in rural Colorado. This was called the Arkansas Valley Conduit, and it's a pipeline to replace groundwater contaminated with high salinity and radioactive elements. This has been on the drawing board since JFK signed this over in 1962. It finally started breaking ground in 2023. The bill passed the House and Senate by voice vote. So what that means is it was unanimous, essentially. They didn't have to call an official roll call vote. The CBO, or the Congressional Budget Office, said it would cost the federal government less than $500,000 to do this. But the president vetoed it. He called it fiscal responsibility. But here's what actually happened, okay? The bill was sponsored by, and this is no fan of the show, by the way, the bill was sponsored by Lauren Boebert. And Lauren Boebert was one of the Republicans who broke with Trump over the Epstein files. Trump promised retaliation against Colorado for this issue, and of course for his random-ass conspiracy theory about Tina Peters. We've talked about Tina Peters also on the show, by the way. If you're not familiar, Tina Peters is the Colorado clerk who was charged and convicted by a Republican prosecutor for electioneering, for fraud, and for tampering with election equipment. So, because of this, the President of the United States of America just vetoed clean water for 50,000 people. Many of whom, by the way, voted for him 3 times. And he did it because he's mad at Lauren Boebert, who, again, is no hero of the show. Lauren said, this veto has nothing to do with political retaliation, interesting, for calling out corruption and demanding accountability. Yeah. She said she hopes that. Okay, just to be very clear. I feel like she could have been a little bit more forceful. The point is, when you cross the president, he doesn't just come after you. He comes after your constituents, your community, and the people who depend on you. He's going to make you hurt for crossing his path, making him angry. Well, it's despicable. His feud with one congresswoman and over a false story about one county clerk are about to cost 50,000 people safe access to drinking water. And it's disgusting. But it's not the only disgusting thing. Welcome, everyone, to the Ignition News. We're getting on with our late night show here. If you're watching live on TikTok, which we stream live on TikTok and Instagram, hey, Instagram, good to see you. I would ask you to go ahead and find the show by typing theignition.news into your web browser or searching any podcast platform for the Ignition News. The reason we launched the Ignition News is we want to provide unfiltered, uncensored news about what's happening in this country, that you can take that information and go back to your community and do good work. Let's go ahead and move over, different state entirely. Let's talk about what happens when this administration personally attacks someone because that person embarrasses the administration. We've talked about this gentleman a lot on the show. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Salvadoran man, a Maryland resident. He has an American wife and an American child. In 2019, a judge granted him protection from deportation after finding that he faced danger in El Salvador from gang retaliation. He's been living and working under ICE supervision for many years. You all know this, obviously. He was famously sent to El Salvador's Secot mega prison, claiming, of course, by the administration that he was a member of MS. The administration actually acknowledged that they incorrectly sent him to El Salvador, calling it an administrative error, and multiple courts ordered them to bring him home. The Supreme Court, by the way, finally ordered the president to facilitate his return, but they fought it at every step. So when they finally brought him back in June, they actually arrested him again. What was the charge, you might ask? Eating a succulent Chinese meal? No, sorry, that's a deep internet reference. No, it was nobody gets the joke? Okay. It was a 2019 traffic stop where he was driving with other people in the vehicle, and at the time, people let him go with a warning. No charges. The police let him go. So, then what happens is they dig up this 5-year-old traffic stop that resulted in no charges, and they turned it into federal prosecution, but only after courts forced them to fix their illegal deportation. So basically, he gets illegally taken to El Salvador through great effort by, I believe it was Chris Van Hollen, Senator Chris Van Hollen, I could be wrong there, brings him back, and then the Justice Department decides to punish him by vindictively prosecuting him. Now, a judge has canceled his trial, and he's ordered an investigation into this. Judge Crenshaw wrote that Garcia had enough evidence to warrant this investigation, and if prosecutors can't justify charging, well, they got to dismiss the charges. The judge noted several Trump admission statements that raise cause for concern. Right now, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is free on supervised release with 2 ankle bracelets, which is wild, while the administration is desperately trying to deport him again, not to El Salvador, but to random African countries. And this ties right back to Minnesota and to Colorado. In Minnesota, regulatory failure allows fraud. In Colorado, political grievance caused 50,000 people not to get safe drinking water. It's the same pattern, it's just different targets this time. I will say, Kilmar Abrego Garcia definitely escalated this week by posting a now extremely viral TikTok video of himself to gospel music. Little bit of a burn to the administration. We'll see how that works out. Welcome, everyone, to the Ignition News. In good news, and where it gets kind of interesting, is that resistance is working. And we can see that in Iowa. Renee Hardman just beat Republican Lucas Lofton yesterday in a special election for Iowa State Senate. Her victory officially blocks Republicans from gaining their supermajority. A GOP supermajority in Iowa would mean 2/3 control, which means that they could override vetoes, they could call special sessions, and they could approve appointees with no Democratic input. However, her win keeps them at 33-17, which is still obviously a solid Republican majority, but not the 2/3 they need to shut out Democrats entirely. This story keeps getting better, by the way. She's the first Black woman elected to the Iowa Senate. She's the CEO of a Lutheran Social Services of Iowa, which brings us back to the safety net story we'll get to in a little bit. And here's why this connects. Obviously, this administration is freezing childcare funding. They're blocking access to clean water, and they're vindictively prosecuting a man just because he happened to be returned back to the United States. This is why it is important that you get involved in your local community, that you vote in these small, hyper-local elections, because Iowa just demonstrated how to shut out complete control by the GOP. That's pretty good stuff. I do want to point out, everyone, that our podcast is brought to you tonight by Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise. Ignite is our signature podcast, which is a field guide on fighting fascism in America. Ignite has 12 episodes and 4 bonus episodes teaching you how to get involved and to push back against fascism, whether that is by getting the pothole fixed in front of your house, or whether that is holding the garbage company accountable, by the way. It's an ongoing story we love to talk about. Please consider downloading Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise. Let's get on to some additional stories. For our last story of the night, I want to talk to you about and demonstrate to you the systemic damage that is being caused to some of the people working in our communities to help those most vulnerable. Let's zoom out and see how all of this fits into the bigger picture. Because, of course, what happened in 2025, as we have just one day left of this year, is not random chaos. It is systemic. There's a really great report from NPR, and they reported from Logan, Ohio, where Hocking Athens Perry Community Action, or HAPCAP, runs services across 10 counties in Appalachian, Iowa, or Ohio, my apologies. So they run the following programs: Meals on Wheels, Head Start, public transit, employment help, food banks. They're one of a thousand, or not one of a thousand, they're one of thousands of agencies nationwide serving 15 million of the most vulnerable Americans. But this year, they have been under constant assault. The most urgent threat was to 6 Head Start centers. The director was on call telling coordinators they were laying off everyone tomorrow. Then, because of seemingly random government change, they said, just kidding, Head Start is excluded. The whiplash of that obviously destroyed trust in his community, and it just kept coming. The OMB, or Office of Management and Budget, labeled the Community Services Block Grant, which funds those agencies, a woke program. Now, Congress did eventually fund this, but OMB took many months to release the funds back to the community. An OMB spokesman said that these programs fund radically partisan activities like teaching toddlers to be anti-racist and LGBTQIA plus welcoming. So the translation there, for those of you listening, is Meals on Wheels is woke if it serves gay people. Head Start is radical if it acknowledges racism exists. Of course, meanwhile, federal buyouts targeted staff who administer safety net programs. The offices of these programs were gutted, the services of these programs were disrupted, and of course, the people trying to do this were just scrambling to find solutions. Good example, there's a group that oversees federal funding for 17 anti-poverty groups in eastern Ohio. They said, not knowing which of our many services we're going to be able to keep operating makes us waste valuable capacity trying to plug holes that shouldn't be holed. Now let's connect this back to everything else. In Minnesota, 19,000 kids lose childcare. In Colorado, 50,000 people keep drinking radioactive water. In Maryland, a man gets prosecuted for embarrassing the administration, and across the country, anti-poverty programs, which are serving 15 million people, are being systematically dismantled and destroyed. These are not separate stories. They're all part of the same story. They want to make poverty hurt more. They want to punish communities for institutional failures. They want to use the legal system for vengeance. And they want to destroy the safety nets of this country, what few safety nets remain, by the way, and call it efficiency. You got people in Logan, Ohio lining up in the freezing rain, to get food assistance. Their heaters don't work. Their water system is literally crumbling. The jobs they have, if they have them, do not pay enough. And the federal government of the United States is actively making it worse. And I do have an additional story I want to share you. It's actually the story of some of the listeners of the Ignition News. So I want to share with you, earlier in today's Ignition News, we talked about and we spoke about private equity taking over veterinary care. That conversation has really exploded. And from that story, I wanted to share with you just some stories of some of the people talking about this. Obviously, we talked about this earlier in the show, how private equity is taking over vet clinics in the United States of America, how 2 out of every 3 critical healthcare issues resulting in euthanasia among pets results in, unfortunately, those pets being put down just because people can't afford it. I want to share with you tonight on the Ignition News some of the stories of these people, because I need to share exactly what this feels like and looks like on the streets of this country. So I'm going to tell you some of those stories about people dealing with this issue. One of the first stories, it cost me $1,400 yearly for wellness visits, shots, and blood work for my 2 smaller senior dogs. Cost for healthcare for the whole family is unaffordable. I'm a foster and seeing tons of dogs dropped off at shelters due to skin issues, rotting teeth, or masses that need to be removed. If they could just get help with vet costs, there would be fewer dogs in the shelters. It is a very dire situation. Someone says, I was told it would cost $10,000 for an emergency surgery on our cat who ate a ribbon which could kill him. This cost did not include post-surgical care, which I was told could be $12,000 more. We were absolutely panicked. Thankfully, a vet that was helping at the ER we went to mentioned a private clinic 2.5 hours away that would likely offer him better care. This woman's kindness changed everything for us. Long and short, we were able to get him to the emergency clinic 2.5 hours away, and the total was only $4,000, which included everything. They even asked us if that was reasonable to us. The staff at the hospital where our cat had surgery treated him like us, and we were family, and offered a list of resources for us while we stayed nearby in a hotel which our boy had surgery. Incredible story. Of course, we talked about here's a story from a vet. As a vet, I agree with you. You have no idea what it's like on our end. I've been saying it for years. Something needs to change. It's not fair for pets, pet owners, vet, or support staff. Someone says vet care is so incredibly expensive and they always push for tests that are not needed. They also offer predatory services like care credit, allowed to give desperate pet owners loans that work fine as long as you could pay it off in time, but watch out if you can't. These loans also allow for increasing pricing for everyone across the board. Someone says, I had to put down 2 pets because I couldn't afford their treatment. The first time, and it was an emergency surgery that cost $2,100, but I was a broke 20-something, and back then, pet insurance didn't exist. The second pet, I did have pet insurance, but my boy had cancer, and the insurance only partially covered some of the treatments and medicines, but not all of the ones that he needed. And I couldn't keep forking out $900 a month. I still feel so betrayed by his death because I didn't have everything right at this time, but I still failed him by the nature of the system. These industries, not vets specifically, take advantage of pet owners, knowing we will do everything for them. And that is so fucking evil. It is fucking evil, by the way. This is absolutely correct, someone else says. One of my professors was just talking to me about how his dog, which needed emergency surgery, was $4,000. Insurance agreed originally to cover it and then reneged, so they had to pay out of pocket $4,000. Someone says this needs to stop. In other countries, governments investigated these practices and put a cap on what could be charged for veterinary care. Someone says, yes, avoid corporate vets. Private vets are also expensive. Yearly teeth cleanings cost $500 alone. One of the members of our community actually had this experience. I'm not going to name this person, but I'm going to tell the story she said. My dog has a cancer tumor that's growing insanely large, and I can't afford the $10,000 to get her leg removed. Yeah. These are stories of the actual impact of these decisions. And when we talk about this specifically, we talk about private equity, which has inserted itself into veterinary care for the creatures in our life that happen to be so important to us. These are no less than family members to us. And the system of this country has allowed things like private equity to enter into, whether it's with veterinary care, nursing home care, dental care. We have worshiped the dollar in this country, and it's terrorizing, destroying our communities. Literally, it is terrorizing and destroying our communities. We are forcing more Americans into poverty than ever before. We are making fewer and fewer Americans wealthier. However, the wealth that they have access to is greater than we might ever have imagined. And because of this, I shared with you just a few of quite literally thousands of these stories of people sharing. And the overall sentiment, I think, that I picked up from several of these comments was people telling me, unfortunately, many, many, many times, I can't afford to have pets anymore. Many times people said to me something like, this is going to be my last dog. The dog I have is my last dog. If something happened, I would have to do the same thing. I would have to put down my dog or my cat. People telling me stories, telling us stories about how they put themselves into near financial bankruptcy to get a surgery for their cat in an age, in an era, in a time when we've made such medical advancements, so many advancements in medicine, technology, and science, that we should not be having these types of conversations. But part of why we do what we do on the Ignition News is to do exactly this thing, to share the truth, to share the stories, yes, to outrage people, to get people off their ass and understand how their communities are being ravaged by private equity, by billionaires, by politicians, and yes, by their wealthy neighbors. And I understand it is a difficult decision to make, but a lot of times what happens in these private equity conversations is veterinary clinics, vets, people who devoted at one time their life to the service of taking care of people's pets. I think that's got to be one of the most noble professions in the world. They get put in front of them a check, and the check is so fat and it's so crazy. And they find themselves having a great moral dilemma. And the great moral dilemma they find for themselves is I can walk away from all of this stress, anxiety, this chaos. And I can go retire. I don't have to worry about a damn thing for the next 20 years. I can go on a yacht. I can go to the Mediterranean. Well, my friends, I think the difficult conversation that needs to start happening in this country is some of us have to start saying no to those types of conveniences so that the rest of us can start to have something, some small pittance. No one in America, the greatest country on earth, everyone, by the way, should have a roof over their heads. But the idea that you live in America, the so-called greatest, most wealthy country on earth, and you would dare to utter the phrase, I can't afford to have a cat or a dog, or that's absurd. I'm not that old, really, but I'm old enough to remember this kind of thing did not happen to my family. When I was 8 years old, I had a black lab. Elway was named after John Elway. I'm dating myself here. I have a black lab now. The span of time, the connectivity between those two dogs, I'm sure there's something there I don't know about. But the point is, my dad worked fixing big, like oil rigs, that kind of thing. My mom worked at a bank. She was a teller at a bank. And they made more than enough money to be able to have a house, 2 cars, a boat, a driveway, a yard. And they didn't have to worry about going to the vet. I remember very much, by the way. I remember my dogs going to the vet. They had veterinary emergencies. And my dad, my mother, they never hesitated. Not once. At great expense, yes, of course. But an expense that did not derail our family's financial safety to take their dog to the vet. I'll tell you one story, by the way, to close out the show tonight. It's about a dog named Sherry. It's not a happy story, but it's a story to tell you the truth. So we had a dog named Sherry. She was a Springer Spaniel. She was my mother's first dog. And Sherry was a very, very good dog. Unfortunately, Sherry got into the garage one day. And this was, again, I'm dating myself now, but a very, very long time ago, antifreeze did not have preventative chemicals in it. It's very toxic. Unfortunately, Sherry got into some antifreeze, which, if it doesn't have preventative chemicals, tastes very sweet. It actually tastes like juice. And so our dog got into the antifreeze and she drank some of the antifreeze. She ingested some of the antifreeze because it was, tasted sweet, that kind of thing. We finally figured this out, and this was at nighttime. And I'm going to get emotional talking about this. And she was very, very sick. When we finally found her, she was gone for many days. So when my dad found her, I remember my dad rushing into the house with the dog in his arms, and she was very limp. She's still alive. And the first thing he did was we all got in the truck and we raced down to the vet. He didn't have to think about that. We didn't have to worry if we'd be able to pay the mortgage. He just did the right thing, even though it was probably too late. And she died. This was in Casper, Wyoming. Anyways, I remember my dad walking out into the hallway of the vet, and she died. But I never had to worry about whether I would be safe or whether I would have a roof over my head. And that night, the night that she died, my dad took us to a lake, and it was snowing in Wyoming. It was this lake. It was this lake we would always go fishing in. And he took us out to the lake, and it was snowing and there was ice on the lake. And he turned on his truck headlights, and we did like snow angels in the snow. It was a really good memory. It was a really good memory. People always ask me, like, why do you do what you do? Why are you so stubborn? And the reason is because I grew up in a time when prosperity seemed in my reach. It seemed on the horizon. But obviously now that just is not the case, whether that's for myself or my children, my own children, or for millions and millions of Americans. We are being strangled economically. Our mental health is being taxed, all in the service of an increasingly small and increasingly more wealthy point. Children in this country deserve that kind of care from their parents. Pets in this country deserve that kind of care from the vets. Dads in this country deserve to care for their families and their pets in a way that doesn't financially bankrupt them. And then when it doesn't work out, they deserve to take their kids to a lake and do snow angels because they don't have to worry if they don't go to work tomorrow because their dog died that they're going to get fired. Sometimes I feel like I caught the last sort of chopper out of the worst parts of this country. And now I'm looking back at it through a looking glass, barely having escaped some of what my friends and neighbors, my children are now experiencing. And what, of course, I obviously know is the chaos that millions of Americans have experienced. Black Americans have experienced this for centuries. Immigrants, the vulnerable. But I was fortunate enough for a glimpse of time in my younger days to experience prosperity, hope, and an idea that this country might be a better place. That if my dog gets sick, I don't have to worry about taking him to the vet. This is not that country now. This country is sick. And like the pets in this country, it doesn't seem like we can afford to fix it. But we must rage against that feeling. This is our country. These are our children. These are our homes. These are our pets. Thank you for listening to the Ignition News tonight. I'll be back tomorrow with a little bit more uplifting news. I appreciate you.